Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap a war drama film called Stalingrad. Spoilers incoming. The movie begins in the summer of 1942 at the height of the Second World War. Hitler's army occupied most of Europe and a part of North Africa. A major offensive is in the making through strategic areas, including Stalingrad. At Porto Corvo, Italy, German soldiers are seen by the beach enjoying the momentary peace and the warm Italian weather. When all of a sudden, the soldiers hear the band play, indicating a battle formation. Along with members of his unit, Fritz carries a recovering comrade in a wheelchair. They arrived late, and everyone was already in formation. But they were just in time before the high-ranking officer gave out medals for their previous campaign in Africa. Hans, a lieutenant, is called out to pin awards on his men. Afterward, the whole battalion is ordered to get ready to move out. On board the train out of Italy, Fritz gives out a flying kiss to his girl. In contrast, the others enjoy the scenery one last time, knowing for a fact that they're stormtroopers and are meant to be on the front lines. Soon, they pass the Russian countryside. Hans writes his girl back home a letter. As the company's new lieutenant, he chooses to stay with them in the cart rather than the comforts of his officer privileges to get to know his men and earn their respect. Reality hits when they arrive at musky, cold, and muddy Stalingrad. As the whole battalion marched towards their supposed assignment, they passed by hundreds if not thousands of wounded soldiers who came from the front lines. Hans witnesses the maltreatment of a POW and tries to report it to a German captain, who, in response, laughs it off. Next, the whole battalion gathers and sings a song before listening to a chaplain's words of encouragement. Soon after that, the action starts. The German artillery bombards a Russian industrial ruin while the company takes cover before charging in. When the bombarding stopped, the whole company moved in. A fierce firefight ensues not too long when a German soldier accidentally fires his weapon, revealing their location. The captain orders the soldier who accidentally revealed their position to run towards a strategic enemy machine gun nest and throw a grenade to make up for his mistake earlier. He makes the distance and throws the grenade but dies in the process. His sacrifices allowed the whole company to storm the factory. Due to the darkness, a young German soldier nicknamed Gerger accidentally kills his friend. Fritz and Rollo later come to his aid, and they try to comfort the young man, stating that it happens in close-quarter combat and that they too have done the same. Before Gerger moves out, he witnesses a Russian soldier call out for his mother before dying. Later, the firefight stopped, and bodies of both German and Russian soldiers lay waste on the ground. The German troops listened to a radio broadcast from Hitler stating how important and strategic Stalingrad is. There are only a few pockets of resistance left in the city when in fact, the troops on the ground are having a hard time pushing through the resistance. They started out with 400 men, and currently, 62 are left. Deep into the night, one of the German lookouts fires his gun, and the Russians return fire. Fritz asks if anyone in the troops can speak Russian. A soldier voices out that he can speak it. Fritz orders the soldier to shout at the Russians if they want a temporary truce to get their wounded. The Russians agree if the German comes out first. With no one volunteering to go out, the lieutenant proactively takes on the job with Fritz. They went out with their hands up, indicating that they were not armed. Their counterpart does the same, and they begin to check on their wounded allies in between. Meanwhile, the soldiers from each side ready their arms in case of trouble. Kolja, a young Russian boy, runs out to a wounded soldier despite the danger. Fritz, an enemy, traded food rations while Hans removed dog tags from fallen allies. The truce was short-lived when a German soldier decided to fire a single shot, prompting the Russians to fire back. A firefight ensues, and the men at the ground then try to recover their wounded scrambles. In the midst of the chaos, Hans and Fritz, together with Kolja, make it safely back. The following day, a soldier delivers grub together with letters and news from home. On the other side of the ruins, the Russians play music and hum to the melody, easing the nerves. Meanwhile, Rollo hides his anguish when he receives terrible news from home. Fritz detects the frustration, goes to his side and asks what it was all about. Rollo whispers that while he's risking himself in the front lines, his wife hooks up with a Frenchman POW. The thing is, Rollo's wife wrote the letter herself because they got caught, and she didn't want it to come from someone else. Without warning, all hell breaks loose. The German soldiers react quickly by defending their position. Hans, along with Gerger, Fritz, and two others, patrols the sewers beneath their position, thinking that the Russians might flank them. Meanwhile, Kolja takes advantage of the chaos and escapes. Hans gets separated from the others and encounters a uniformed Russian woman named Irina who was trying to recover a fallen comrade's body. He disarms her and holds her at gunpoint. Irina can speak German and tries to negotiate with Hans for a short truce. The lieutenant agrees that she'll lead him to his buddies in exchange for letting her go. At a certain point of the sewage, Hans takes the lead to check on a corner. Irina takes advantage of the situation, pushes him into the deep waters, and runs off. Hans almost drowned. Fortunately, Fritz comes to his rescue. They later regrouped with the others and helped an ally named Edgar, who trips on an IED. Later, they made it to the makeshift hospital full of wounded German troops. The wounded soldiers overwhelm the medics. With no one attending at the wounded they brought in, Fritz forces a medic at gunpoint to give medical attention to Edgar. The medic protests that he was not a doctor, but Fritz threatens the medic with his gun and tells him to do something to ease the pain. The medic injects morphine at Edgar. Then all of a sudden, a captain comes in and arrests them for pointing a gun and forcing the medic. In the end, Edgar dies. In the winter of 1942, the whole 6th Army has been surrounded on all sides by the combined forces of Russians, Romanians, and others. Meanwhile, Hans and Rollo, Fritz, and Gerger are forced to dig out and defuse mines laid out by the enemies. Soon, they are recalled to fight on the front lines due to the army's grave circumstances. In exchange, Hans voices out that they will fight in exchange for their crimes to be pardoned. The commanding officer agrees. The plan is to intercept an advance troop and stop them on their tracks. The company arrives at its designated position and is dug in its foxholes. The troops' morale is low, but with no option to redeem themselves, they steel themselves for the incoming fight. Later, the enemy consists of a couple tank platoons, foot soldiers appear, and a firefight ensues. The Germans used an anti-tank cannon and a few anti-tank grenades to counter the tanks. The enormous difference in firepower and numbers should have left the Germans to waste, but due to their ingenious tactics and positioning, they come out on top but at the cost of a significant number of lives. With only a few troops left and no horses, the team manually moved the cannon to regroup with the main army despite the heavy winds and thick snow. With no relief troops to cover for them, the whole army lay waste on a village as they retreated to a more strategic position. Soon, the general hands out Hans and the others to reinstate them in the army. Pardoned for their crimes after their heroic ordeal with the enemy tank platoon. But before they can do anything else, Hans and the others are ordered by their direct commanding officer to form a firing line and kill Russian civilians to remind them whose side they're on. Knowing this needless massacre wasn't right, Hans and the others hesitate for a while and try to be firm on their morals. They see the child Kolja among the people in line for execution. Hans tries to reason with the captain in hopes of saving Kolja from the firing squad. But the merciless Nazi officer wasn't having it and orders the men to shoot, or they'd be the ones to replace them instead. With not much option, the unit puts one in the chamber, and when given the command, they pull the trigger. And for good measure, another soldier shoots them from close range. Kolja dies at a very young age. When the unit got back at camp, Fritz couldn't take it anymore and decided to desert. His plan is to go to the airport and leave for good. Disheartened by the events earlier, Hans tells his men that he no longer feels proud of being part of the German army. Traumatized, Hans joins Fritz in his plan to desert along with Gerger. Rollo tries to be reasonable and tries to stop them, but he understands where they're coming from. He just wants to prevent them from committing another mistake that could lead them to trouble. Otto, on the other hand, chooses to stay behind. Soon, Hans, Fritz, and Gerger arrive at a civilian encampment asking for directions. An old man gives them the information in exchange for bread, which the old man hands out to the young ones behind him. On the way, they see frozen cadavers of their allies. George stumbles upon a wounded tag with a visible doctor's signature. Fritz figures that it's their way out of the forsaken place. They look for wounded tags for each one of them. Later, they arrive at the airport, and hundreds of wounded German troops are in line waiting to be inspected for their wounds. A medical officer checks on one wounded soldier and sees powder burns on his stomach, indicating that it's a self-inflicted wound from close range. The medical officer orders the soldier to be shot for being a traitor. Then it's Gerger's turn. A medical officer checks on the tag but can't see the doctor's signature. Fritz tells the doctor that Gerger couldn't speak due to shell shock from a tank battle. The doctor gives out medicine and wishes them well. Meanwhile, as an officer, Hans had no problem with the inspection. The soldiers panic since the last plane is about to leave. They pushed among themselves, and a small riot broke out in a race to get in the plane. Many of the wounded soldiers fail to leave Stalingrad, and they march back to the main army. Hans, Fritz, and Gerger regroup with Otto and the others. They see their captain is heavily wounded. Soon they hear a plane pass by, and the troops check it out. Luckily, the plane drops in supplies, and due to extreme fatigue and hunger, they race to grab whatever food they can. The soldiers enjoy and savor their first taste of edible food after a long while. Later, the commanding officer arrives, points his gun on the troops, and orders them to stop. Talk about a killjoy, but Hans and the others have enough of the abusive commanding officer. Hans tackles the commanding officer, and Rollo fires at the fiend. The commanding officer manages to pull the trigger before getting tackled and killing Gerger. Desperate to be spared, the commanding officer informs them that he has kept supplies at a cellar up the road. But that wasn't enough to convince them. The commanding officer ends up dead at the hands of his own men. Nonetheless, the unit discovers the abundance of supplies the commanding officer was talking about. On top of the meat, alcohol, and others, they find Irina tied up on a bed, the same Dutch-speaking Russian that Hans encountered at the sewers, indicating that she was raped many times by the commanding officer. Irina couldn't return to the resistance army since she'd be deemed a collaborator and deserter. Hans couldn't kill nor rape Irina. Instead, he protected her by telling his men to not touch her. Meanwhile, the men try to enjoy themselves and eat their fill. But in an unexpected turn of events, Otto shoots himself in the head. Rollo carries the captain upstairs to join the front lines, but soon, the captain dies. Rollo is then disarmed by the general, signaling their surrender. The movie ends with Irina convincing Hans and Fritz to escape since none wanted to be imprisoned in the Siberian gulag. They trek the harsh snow for miles and miles. Until one evening, Irina is killed by a lookout before identifying herself. Fritz and Hans manage not to get shot, but due to extreme fatigue and extreme weather, Hans dies first due to hypothermia. Refusing to leave Hans, Fritz soon followed him in the afterlife. 1 million lost their lives during the Battle of Stalingrad. 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner in 1943, but only 6,000 were able to return to their country after the war in 1956. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.